I was wiping the rim of my china teacup when I saw it. A glossy flyer, half crumpled, printed on corporate stock, resting on the kitchen counter. Not mine. The kind of thing Marcus would accidentally leave behind. The way he used to leave Lego bricks on the stairs or notebooks full of half-finished ideas on the couch. I picked it up, smoothing it flat against the counter. It was a promotion party flyer, celebrating our rising stars. A sharp, modern design, the kind that screams networking and stiff cocktails in hotel ballrooms, with echoing laughter and expensive shoes, and there, printed in bold serif, under the gold foil header, Marcus B. Moreno, Director of Digital Growth. Director. Not associate, not team lead. Director. My first reaction was pride. My chest filled with it, as though I'd been holding my breath for 23 years and could finally exhale. I imagined the moment, a spotlight on my son, applauded by peers, recognized for his grit and brilliance. I'd always believed he was destined for more. But then, I noticed the date. Tomorrow. I stood in the stillness of my kitchen, that flyer trembling in my hand. I checked the calendar on the fridge, where I still kept track of Marcus's events, the old-fashioned way. Dry erase marker, and a small paper magnet from the dentist's office. There was nothing written. No hint, no invitation had arrived in the mail. No call, no text, not even a mention over our last Sunday brunch. I reached for my phone, dialed his number with fingers steadied by habit, not emotion. 3 rings. Then his voice. "Hey Mom, what's up?" "I saw the flyer," I said, keeping my voice measured. There was a pause, sharp, clean, like a blade through silk.
"Oh, that."
"That," I repeated, gently. He sighed. "I was going to tell you." "When, Marcus? After the champagne?" His silence was answer enough. My eyes traced the gold print on the flyer again. It gleamed even in the dim kitchen light. It's a work thing," he said finally. "Very professional, formal. Not really your scene." That was when I felt it. The quiet dismissal behind his tone, the strained politeness that tried to wrap rejection in good manners. But I didn't interrupt. I let him fill the silence, like I used to let him talk himself through apologies when he was a child and broke something precious. He did. "It's not that I didn't want you there," he said, already defensive. "It's just, you kind of stand out." I sat down at the table, the teacup untouched beside me. "Marcus," I said, "I've been to your events before. Remember your college induction? Your first showcase pitch?" He hesitated. "Yeah, and those were different." "Different how?" He cleared his throat. "Mom, the way you talk about the old neighborhood, the food truck, how you laugh so loud, it's charming, really, but this event, it's for executives, board members, clients. You don't fit that world." I let that sit. I didn't ask more, didn't cry, didn't plead. "You think I'd embarrass you?" I said instead, quietly, not accusatory, just the truth. Like a fact written in ink. "I just can't take any chances," he replied. "This promotion means everything to me." And just like that, a lifetime of sacrifices settled into place. I saw them clearly early mornings, with cheap coffee and sore knees, the cold wind at the food truck window, double shifts and borrowed shoes and silent prayers whispered through exhaustion. He'd forgotten. Or worse, he remembered and no longer wanted that version of his story. "I see," I said. And I did. He stammered something. Then maybe regret, maybe guilt. But I'd already set the phone down. I sat in the quiet, the flyer still in my hand, and let the moment breathe. The refrigerator hummed softly. A dog barked 2 houses down. My tea had gone cold. I thought about warming it, but didn't. Instead, I walked to the small hallway mirror, the one above the shelf of framed photos. Marcus in kindergarten, with spaghetti sauce on his chin. Marcus at graduation with my arms around him. Marcus last Christmas, laughing as he carved the ham. I looked at my reflection, my long silver-streaked hair, pinned in a soft French twist. My skin, warm with undertones my late husband used to call sun-kissed. My elegant wrap dress, with floral embroidery, soft but dignified. The pearl necklace he gave me on our 10th anniversary rested against my collarbone. My eyes met mine. I did not see shame. I saw strength. I had built a business from nothing, from hot grease and sliced onions and 30-second lunch breaks. I'd raised a child into a man. I'd given him every inch of a foundation he now stood on. And he wanted to pretend it hadn't been poured with my hands. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up the flyer again. My hands no longer trembled. Then I opened my laptop and typed in the name at the bottom of the flyer, Pinnacle Industries. It was time to understand exactly what kind of party I'd been excluded from. The glow of the laptop screen lit my face in the darkened kitchen. I hadn't turned on the overhead light. I didn't need brightness. I needed clarity. Pinnacle Industries. I typed the name slowly, as if the act itself was a confrontation. The search results unfolded like petals of a flower I didn't recognize, a gleaming website, a sprawling LinkedIn presence, news articles in digital business magazines filled with phrases like disruptive innovation, agile leadership, and market realignment. All buzzwords, really, but they spoke of ambition and hierarchy. They spoke of polished shoes in glass offices and young men in tailored blazers who didn't want their mothers reminding the room where they came from. I clicked on the executive team page. There he was, my son, Marcus B. Moreno. A professionally lit photo-neutral backdrop, sharp gray suit, thin navy tie. He looked taller, somehow, more angular. The write-up beneath his name was sterile and efficient. Oversees strategic growth in digital client acquisitions, specializes in integration of scalable tech solutions. MBA graduate. I stopped reading. This version of Marcus was unfamiliar, shaved of humor, stripped of warmth. I remembered him in his high school robotics team hoodie, hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, eating cereal with a fork because all the spoons were in the sink. I remembered nights he'd fall asleep with a pencil behind his ear and a notebook under his cheek. That boy lived here, in this house, not in the photo on my screen. But I also understood something important. In that moment, Marcus hadn't betrayed me out of cruelty. He'd done it out of fear, a fear I recognized all too well. Fear of not belonging. That kind of fear gets passed down like furniture. It doesn't go away, it just learns to wear a suit. I closed his profile and started digging deeper. The company had been founded 15 years ago by a man named David Richardson. Tech background, several patents, the kind of entrepreneur who made the cover of a regional magazine with arms crossed and a jawline like ambition. Recent articles revealed something more interesting. He was looking to retire, selling off partial assets, quietly distancing himself from operations. There was movement happening beneath the surface. I read until my eyes burned, scanning financials, watching industry trends. The truth took shape gradually. Pinnacle was stable, but stagnating. Their innovation was safe, predictable. They'd grown cautious in a market that rewarded risk. Their competitors were eating into their revenue with better user interfaces and smarter logistics. But no one was addressing one glaring opportunity: food service, logistics. It wasn't a flashy phrase, but I knew the terrain better than most. I'd lived in supply chains, I'd built partnerships with distributors from scratch, I understood seasonal margins, perishability timelines, mobile kitchen routes, and regional compliance like it was second nature. The food industry was desperate for smarter tech, and Pinnacle had the infrastructure to deliver it. They just didn't have the vision yet. I opened a second tab and began compiling names, people I knew. Clients who had once been strangers, but whose weddings I'd catered, whose corporate events I'd rescued, whose families I'd fed during storms when the grocery trucks stalled. I wasn't just their caterer, I'd been their emergency contact, their problem solver, the woman who always got it done. There were three in particular I remembered: Dante Lin, a venture capitalist who once offered to invest in my expansion; Mia Townsend, who ran a logistics platform startup; and Judge Wallace, who always said, "If you ever go corporate, Alina, I'd back you without blinking." I wasn't going corporate. I was going strategic. I wrote each of them a message. Not long, not desperate, just direct. You once told me you'd bet on me. I'm calling in that bet. There's a company with potential, and I have a way to make it profitable again. Let's talk. Then I shut the laptop. The night had turned thick with silence. I could hear the radiator ticking in the hallway and the faint stir of leaves brushing against the window pane. My tea was cold, untouched, but something in me was wide awake. I stood slowly, pressing my hand to my lower back. My body reminded me that I wasn't 35 anymore, That plans like this required more than fire, they needed stamina, but I had that too. Age had taken some things, yes, but not the quiet resolve, not the will to outlast. I walked to the kitchen sink and rinsed my teacup. As the water ran over porcelain, I remembered the first night I realized Marcus might outgrow me. He was 12, maybe 13. Some classmate had teased him about our beat-up food truck parked outside the school. He'd come home and slammed his bedroom door without speaking. When I brought him dinner, he didn't look up. "It's just a truck," I'd said gently. "No," he'd mumbled. "It's my whole life." He'd said it with shame then, but I saw now how deeply that moment had cut, how it had festered and calcified into this new version of him. It wasn't my job to erase his shame. It was my job to outlive it and show him what it looked like when a woman refused to shrink just because someone thought she should. He didn't invite me to his party, so I would build a new room entirely, one where people like me didn't need invitations to belong. By noon the next day, 2 of the 3 had replied. Mia's message was curt, direct, just like I remembered her from the corporate galas I used to cater. "Lena, if you're asking, I'm listening. Let's set a call for Friday. Noon. My team will join." Dante's response was warmer, more familiar. "I've been waiting for the day you decided to stop just feeding boardrooms and start joining them. You've got 10 minutes this afternoon. Make it count." Only Wallace hadn't replied yet, but I wasn't concerned. Judges always made you wait. I spent the rest of the morning preparing, not for a presentation, but for a conversation. There was no deck, no slide transitions, no color-coded roadmap. I wasn't selling them a startup. I was bringing them a reckoning. The difference was subtle, but critical. I sat at the dining table, same one where I used to sew Marcus's school badges onto his little uniforms and drew a mind map across 3 sheets of printer paper. I labeled one column Entente Vertical, Food Logistics, another Deadweight in Current Market, and the third What Elena Brings. Under that last one, I didn't write grit, or vision, or tenacity. They already knew I had those. Instead, I wrote proven vendor relationships, last mile delivery experience, embedded trust in the small business community, a reputation for getting the impossible done. When Dante called, his voice was just as I remembered, like bourbon with a smirk. "Well, Elena, what's the play?" "Pinnacle is plateauing. The market knows it, the leadership knows it. They're being cautious because they're not sure how to pivot. I can make the pivot for them." There was a pause. "What's in it for you?" I didn't hesitate. "Control. Not just ownership. I want strategic direction, full access to infrastructure, and veto power on leadership continuity." "You're planning a full acquisition." "I'm planning a correction," I said. "One that benefits us both." He chuckled low and slow. "You've thought this through." "I've lived this through." We spoke for 12 minutes. By the end, I had his verbal support and a promise to loop in his legal team. I sat back in my chair afterward, not triumphant, but clear. There's a kind of calm that follows certainty. Not comfort, this wouldn't be easy, but something quieter. A locked-in silence, like the moment before a storm, when the wind holds its breath. At 2:30, I brewed a fresh pot of tea and waited for Mia's video call. She logged on from a high-rise office with exposed brick and designer lighting. She was younger than I remembered. Or maybe just sharper, sleeker haircut. All business. "I've got 8 minutes, she said, glancing off screen. I got to the point. Pinnacle is losing ground. Their competitors are eating into their B2B contracts, but they're sitting on a back-end platform that could power a whole new frontier, perishable logistics." She blinked. "You want to merge food tech into a cold start software pipeline?" "I want to expand their architecture. My networks are ready. I just need the infrastructure. I already have Dante. I want you for operational scaling." She leaned forward. "You really believe you can run this place?" I smiled. "I believe they need someone who knows what scarcity looks like, what resourcefulness feels like, and what people trust when things fall apart. That's me." She didn't smile back, but she nodded. "I'll bite, but I want equity and a seat at the board." "You'll have both." We ended the call with a digital handshake. She'd email her terms by Monday. I closed the laptop and pressed my palms together. It was happening. The scaffolding of something vast and irreversible had begun to rise, beam by beam. But there was one more piece I needed to secure. That night, I pulled out my wedding box from the hall closet. Tied with a fraying ribbon, the box smelled faintly of cedar and old perfume. Inside, my husband's cufflinks, our guest book, Marcus's birth certificate folded into a plastic sleeve, and a single cream-colored envelope. Judge Wallace's personal card. He hadn't answered my message yet, but I didn't need to wait. I knew where he played poker, every Thursday night, second floor of a Masonic hall turned social club on 8th and Penrose. He'd invited me to cater there once, years ago, said they liked their shrimp cocktail old school and their drinks stronger than their ethics. I drove there just after 7. The parking lot was full of aging sedans and one painfully new Porsche. I walked in, heels clicking against old linoleum, nodding at the receptionist like I belonged. Because I did. Upstairs, the air was smoky, with cigar talk and deals no one ever wrote down. There, at the far end of the table, was Wallace, still broad-shouldered, still sharp-eyed. He saw me immediately. "Elena Rodriguez," he said, standing halfway. "Come to deal us all out?" "Come to raise the stakes," I replied. They gave me his seat. No one argued. I didn't touch the cards. "I need your backing, quiet, but full," I said as he poured us both a scotch. "It's a majority acquisition. I've got the capital. I need the clean legal path." Wallace sipped, assessing. "And your son?" I held his gaze. "He'll find out when the rest of the company does." He whistled softly. "Does he deserve what's coming?" "No," I said, honest as anything. "But he earned it." He clinked his glass against mine. "I'll make some calls." I left before the second hand was dealt. Outside, the air was cool and windless. The kind of air that didn't whisper warnings or send shivers. The kind that just held you in place. Let you feel every inch of your momentum. I pulled my coat tighter, walked to the car, and drove home in silence. Everything was in motion now. The deal, the shift, the storm, and me, steady as ever, right at the center of it. By Monday morning, the paperwork was ready. All 3 parties, Dante, Mia, and Wallace, had come through with their commitments, each of them moving like quiet clockwork. Wallace's team had assembled the shell company. I needed to front the offer. Mia had outlined a 6-month roadmap for her logistics team to onboard post-acquisition. And Dante? He secured the capital, quiet, fast, and just under the radar. The pieces aligned, not with noise, but precision. Exactly the way I'd lived my life. Still, none of it felt real until I stepped into the law office where the final signatures would be exchanged. It was on the 24th floor of a building I'd never had a reason to enter before. The elevator was mirrored, the lobby was draped in gray and brushed gold, and the receptionist had the kind of practiced, gentle voice that was trained in places like Yale. "Miss Rodriguez," she said, standing. "They're ready for you." The doors to the conference room opened silently, as if they'd been expecting someone important. In the center of the long table were 3 neatly stacked packets of paper, each separated by colored tabs and metallic clips. Across from them stood a man I vaguely recognized from the Pinnacle Press photos, Gerald Nance, Director of Acquisitions. He wore a navy suit and the kind of expression that was always halfway between a smile and a smirk. "I have to admit," he said, gesturing to the head of the table, "I didn't expect you." I took the seat without blinking. No one ever does. That's their mistake. A junior associate entered, her hands trembling slightly as she passed out copies for review. I didn't rush. I let my fingers trace the edge of the paper, familiar now with legal language, thanks to years of signing contracts with event halls and corporate clients who tried to nickel and dime their way out of obligations. I'd learned to read between lines. I'd learned when silence cost more than speech. "You'll maintain 72% control, post-acquisition," Gerald said, as if the number might startle me. "The current CEO will remain in place temporarily. Advisory status only. After that, the board will confirm a replacement." "I'm not interested in placeholders," I replied, flipping to the 3rd page. "When I take something over, I don't rent space, I build new walls." That gave him pause. He leaned forward slightly. "Forgive the question, but do you have operational experience in tech?" I smiled. Then, not because it was funny, but because it was exactly the kind of question men like him asked when someone like me stepped into their circle. They wanted to know where my stripes were sewn, whether they were earned in boardrooms or borrowed from someone more official. I have operational experience in keeping people alive with 7 burners and a truck engine that stalled in cold weather. I've rebuilt routing schedules in hurricanes. I've negotiated supply contracts across state lines without formal training. I know customer retention better than your best UX designer because I had to remember 100 faces every week just to keep them coming back. Gerald said nothing. He didn't need to. I turned to the final page. Let's begin. The signing took just under 20 minutes. Each document carefully marked, countersigned, and notarized. The room was still. No confetti. No champagne. Just a soft hum from the overhead lights and the click of pens against a polished walnut table. When it was done, Gerald extended his hand. "Welcome to Pinnacle Industries, Ms. Rodriguez." I shook it. "Call me Elena. We'll be seeing a lot of each other." He nodded, more cautious now. As I left the room, the receptionist handed me a slim envelope. "Courier dropped this off for you earlier," she said. Inside was a small note, handwritten, in heavy blue ink. "Sometimes the loudest rooms fall silent when the right person enters. Make sure they hear you, Wallace." I folded the note and tucked it into my bag. Back at home, I stood in the entryway for a long moment before moving. The sunlight came in low through the front window, catching the corners of the picture frames along the hallway. I stared at them. The birthdays, the graduations, the holidays where Marcus had sat beside me with a full plate and an empty phone, always checking for something more interesting. It wasn't until that moment that I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Hurt, yes. Disappointed, profoundly. But the rage that had pushed me forward these past weeks had shifted. What replaced it wasn't revenge. It was purpose. Marcus hadn't just excluded me from a party. He'd erased the path that got him to that party in the first place. I hadn't set out to humiliate him. That was never the point. I'd set out to reclaim the truth, to remind both of us that the woman he tried to distance himself from wasn't a relic. She was a root. And roots don't ask for invitations. They just hold everything together. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. "A message from Mia. Announcement scheduled for Thursday. Let us know if you'd like to attend the internal town hall virtually or in person." I didn't hesitate. In person. There are some things worth being seen for. I arrived 20 minutes early. Pinnacle's headquarters sat like a monument to modern ambition, 32 floors of glass and steel, curved edges reflecting the morning light like it had something to prove. The front entrance shimmered with chrome fixtures and a rotating door that spun a little too fast for comfort. I stepped through anyway. The young man at the reception desk looked up from his monitor, eyes skimming my figure, the way people do when they're trying to fit someone into a box they already built. "Good morning," he said cautiously. "Are you here for the vendor meeting?" "No," I replied, setting my purse gently on the counter. "I'm here to meet with your executive leadership team." That made him pause. "And your name, ma'am?" "Elena Rodriguez." His fingers froze. He glanced quickly at the screen, then back at me. "Of course. My apologies. I wasn't expecting you so early. I like to see things for myself." He stood immediately. "We've arranged a private elevator. If you'll follow me." The ride up was smooth and silent. No music, just the faint hum of movement, and my reflection staring back from the polished metal walls. I studied it without blinking. The French twist was still secure, not a strand out of place. My dress, dark rose with embroidered vinwork, rested gracefully against my frame. The pearls sat cool and steady at my collar. I looked like someone who belonged here, even if no one else had planned on it. When the elevator opened on the executive floor, the receptionist there didn't hesitate. She stood, greeted me with a quiet, "Good morning, Miss Rodriguez," and motioned toward the large corner office at the end of the hall. The space had likely once belonged to David Richardson. Now it was mine. The walls were glass, the furniture minimal, a walnut desk, 2 leather chairs, and a framed digital screen displaying rotating data visualizations in soft hues. It smelled faintly of citrus and coffee. I moved to the window and looked out at the city below, tight grids of ambition and traffic, lives unfolding one spreadsheet at a time. This office had hosted decisions that shifted millions. But today, it would hold something simpler, a conversation long overdue. There was a knock at the door. "Come in." It opened slowly, and in walked Marcus. He froze the moment he saw me. There was a full 3 seconds where he didn't say a word. His suit jacket hung from one arm, and his expression flickered from confusion to disbelief. Mom? I turned, fully. Marcus. He looked behind him, as if checking whether this was a dream. What are you doing here? I own the company now. His jaw twitched. No, that's not. Wait, is this? He stepped further in, his hands trembling slightly. You're the investor? The acquisition they've been whispering about all week? I'm not an investor, I said calm. I'm the majority shareholder. As of this morning, I'm also acting CEO until a long-term successor is confirmed. He lowered himself into one of the chairs across from the desk without being asked, as if his knees gave out on their own. You bought Pinnacle? Yes. But why? I looked at him, really looked at him. His face held the stress of sleepless nights, his hair sharper, more styled than I remembered. This wasn't the boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder in the food truck after school. This was a man buried under suits and performance, wondering when the mask had fused with the skin beneath it. You told me I'd embarrass you, I said, voice level. You didn't want me at your promotion party. You said I didn't fit. He covered his mouth with one hand, not speaking. I needed you to remember that I didn't raise you to erase your history. I raised you to live. He finally spoke, hoarse. But you didn't need to do this. I didn't need to. I agreed. I chose to, because sometimes the only way to remind someone of their roots is to plant a new tree beside them, something they can't ignore. He looked down. I was ashamed. Not of you, of the gap between who I am and who they expect me to be. I didn't know how to reconcile both. You start, I said, by standing in both truths. Not one. He sat in silence, the weight of what I'd done slowly settling around him. Not out of spite, not vengeance, but clarity. Does anyone else know yet? He asked. Only the board. The staff will find out at this afternoon's town hall. I'd like you there. His eyes flickered up. As what? As yourself, I said gently. No more pretending. I moved around the desk and placed a folder in front of him. Inside, a memo outlining the restructuring, a draft of a new mentorship program, and a list of upcoming initiatives focused on accessibility and inclusion. Ideas that had come from years of watching systems ignore people like me, like him, like the community that raised us both. He opened the folder, scanning the first few lines. You're serious? I'm always serious when it comes to legacy. He closed the folder slowly, then looked at me with something different in his eyes. Not fear, not anger. Respect. I'll be there, he said. I nodded. Then let's begin. The announcement was scheduled for 3 o'clock. By 2:45, the main conference space on the 12th floor had begun to fill with employees, some arriving in tight, self-conscious groups, others drifting in alone, earbuds pulled out, ID badges clipped to shirt pockets. There was an unspoken tension hanging in the room. News had spread, but incompletely. The employees didn't know who had bought the company. Rumors ranged from another tech merger to an out-of-state equity firm with a reputation for sweeping layoffs. I heard someone near the back whisper, "Do you think we're being sold off?" I stood just off stage behind a partition, watching the room settle into rows of minimalist chairs. The company had spared no expense designing this space: pale oak flooring, ceiling-mounted acoustic panels, high-res displays at either side of the stage. Everything polished, everything impersonal. It felt more like a showroom than a workplace. Marcus stood beside me, silent. He wore the same navy suit he'd worn to his promotion dinner, though now it looked different on him, less like armor, more like fabric. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked quietly. "I'm not here to be applauded," I said. "I'm here to be seen." He nodded and stepped back as the event coordinator tapped the mic once, then gestured for me to approach. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't read from the teleprompter they'd offered. I walked to the center of the stage and waited for the room to quiet on its own. When I spoke, I made sure my voice didn't rise to fill the space. I let it settle into it instead, like water finding its shape. "My name is Elena Rodriguez," I began, "and as of this week, I am the new majority shareholder and interim CEO of Pinnacle Industries." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some faces shifting in surprise, others stiffening with the guarded neutrality of people who've seen too many reshuffles to hope for anything lasting. "I didn't come from tech," I continued. "I wasn't born into boardrooms or investment portfolios. I started my first business from a food truck. My kitchen was my office. My calculator was a grease-stained notepad, and my clients, I gestured gently to the room. They weren't customers, they were people I knew by name, people I grew alongside. There was no slideshow, no credentials listed on a screen, just my story, plain, whole, undiluted. I bought this company not to gut it, but to guide it. Not to reinvent what's already working, but to restore what's been forgotten, innovation-driven, not by profit, but by purpose. I paused. Faces were watching now, less skeptical, more curious. I could feel the shift. Too many of us have been told we don't fit, that we're too loud, too different, too rooted in the wrong kind of past. I was told, not long ago, that I didn't belong in this world, that I was an embarrassment. I didn't look at Marcus. I didn't need to, he was listening harder than anyone. I'm here because I want to build a company where no one has to feel that way again, where the janitor and the CTO share the same dignity, where people with different accents, different clothes, different ways of thinking aren't seen as liabilities, but as assets. A young woman in the front row, barely out of college, judging by her nervous grip on a notepad, nodded slowly. We will restructure, yes, but not to cut costs, to build bridges. We'll invest in mentorship, not just metrics. We'll expand our reach into industries that have been ignored by this sector for far too long. Food systems, local distribution, the kinds of networks that feed people, not just markets. I could feel the weight of my words landing, some gently, others like truth finally spoken aloud in a room that had never welcomed it before. I'll be honest with you, I said. I know I'm not what you expected, but maybe what we've been expecting hasn't been enough. The room went still. Then the applause began, not loud or rehearsed, but steady, real. I stepped back from the mic and nodded to the coordinator. There were updates to come, breakout meetings, strategy briefings, but none of that mattered more than what had just happened. They had seen me, and they hadn't looked away. After the event, the elevator was quiet, just Marcus and me, descending back to the executive floor. I've never heard them that silent before, he said. They weren't silent, I replied. They were listening. He looked at me, this time not as a son puzzled by his mother's unfamiliar domain, but as a man seeing something he hadn't fully understood until now. You didn't just walk in and take over, he said. You brought something with you. I brought everything they told me to leave behind, I said, and I said it right here, in the center of the table. When we stepped off the elevator, a junior staffer passed by with a tablet and stopped. Ms. Rodriguez? That was... Thank you. Really? I nodded. Tell me your name. Cassie. I'm an analyst. New. Not anymore, I said with a small smile. Now you're part of the foundation. She beamed and disappeared into a side corridor. Marcus exhaled slowly. You're going to change everything here. No, I said. We are, if you're ready. He hesitated, then he offered his hand. I took it. Not as a mother, not as a superior, as a partner. That evening, long after the final breakout meeting had ended and the last set of data slides had been dismissed by tired executives, I found myself alone in the glass-walled office once again. The city below shimmered in the blue dusk, cars like fireflies, streetlights flickering on one by one, and people flowing between corners and doorways like currents beneath the surface. The quiet now was different. It wasn't the cold, hollow silence of being excluded. It was the stillness of completion. Unfinished. Yes, but finally in motion. I stood at the window, heels sinking ever so slightly into the plush carpet, and reflected on the moments no one else would ever see. The night spent on my knees, scrubbing truck tires clean in the dark. The mornings I woke at 4 to prep sauces and fill bread trays while Marcus slept soundly on a cot behind the counter. The way I'd learned to stretch $15 into 3 meals and a smile, all of it was here with me now, stitched invisibly into the seams of my dress, layered into the tone of my voice when I spoke to those employees earlier today. People kept asking if I had a background in business. I always wanted to tell them, yes. But it wasn't printed on paper, it was written in motion. The office door creaked open. I didn't turn, but I heard the hesitation in Marcus's footsteps. I thought you'd gone home, I said softly. I did, for 20 minutes. Then I came back. I turned toward him. His jacket was off, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He looked younger like this, more real. "Can I sit?" he asked. I nodded, and he dropped into the chair across from mine. For a moment, we sat in silence, just the tick of the wall clock and the soft pulse of city noise beneath the glass. "I've been thinking," he finally said, "about everything you said today." I waited. "I keep going back to something you used to say when I was a kid. You'd come home from working a double and still cook dinner, and if I asked why you didn't just buy takeout, you'd say, 'Because love should still taste like something.'" I smiled. "That sounds like me." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I forgot that. Somewhere along the way, I started measuring everything in achievement, titles, applause, appearances. I got scared that if people saw the struggle behind me, they'd think less of me, or less of your success." He nodded slowly. "Marcus," I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm, "success that can't hold the weight of where you came from is too fragile to be real." He rubbed the back of his neck, shoulders tight. I let them tell me who I needed to be, and I pushed away the parts of myself that didn't fit their mold. I walked to my desk and picked up the photo I'd set there earlier, that afternoon. It was small, just me and Marcus in front of the food truck. Grease-stained aprons, matching wide grins, and the shine of hope behind both our eyes. I handed it to him. "Do you remember this day?" He laughed softly. "Our first catering gig. The printer jammed, and we had to handwrite all the menu cards. And we were so sure no one would show. But they did." I sat across from him, folding my hands in my lap. "I didn't buy this company to punish you, Marcus. I bought it because I saw an opportunity to teach again on a bigger scale. Not just to you, but to every person here who's ever been told their background is something to overcome." He stared at the photo for a long time. "I'm sorry for how I treated you, for making you feel like you didn't belong in the world I was building." I shook my head. "You didn't make me feel that. You reminded me why I needed to build my own." His eyes met mine. This time, there was no pride to defend, no ego to protect, just a son trying to rebuild a bridge with the same hands that once built Lego towers on our living room floor. "I want to help you," he said quietly. "Not just as a manager, as your son." "You always had that role," I replied. "You just forgot how valuable it was." He stood and returned the photo to the desk, his movements slower now, more deliberate. "I think I'd like to go back to the start," he said. "The roots. Remember what made this matter in the first place." I watched him cross the room and pause at the door. "I'll be in early tomorrow," he added. "And if you're still making that rosemary bread on Sundays, I'd love a slice." I smiled, but said nothing. Some answers don't need to be spoken. After he left, I turned back to the window. The city was darker now, but still alive. Lights blinked in distant windows like small reminders. Millions of lives, millions of stories, and somehow, mine had made it here. I wasn't the woman they'd expected to lead this company. I was the woman they never saw coming. And I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I arrived before the cleaning crew had finished restocking the break room. There's something about a building before it wakes, its lights still dim, air crisp with filtered silence, elevators idle, doors stay shut. It's a kind of hush that makes you notice everything. The scuff on the lobby tile, the uneven stitching on the reception couch, the way a place, no matter how polished, always has traces of its use. I wasn't headed to my office. Not yet. I had asked for access to all departments, not just in reports or dashboards, but with my feet, and today I wanted to see the floor that never made it into board meetings. The call center on the 5th level. It was the only part of the building that hadn't been remodeled in recent years. The carpeting was old, the partitions beige and worn. It was the first space you passed through if you were hired from an agency. Temporary, transitional, invisible. When I stepped off the elevator, the lights were still warming up, casting long, soft shadows across rows of desks. Phones hadn't started ringing yet. Only a few employees were in, logging into systems or sipping coffee in silence. They barely noticed me at first, which is exactly what I wanted. I walked the perimeter slowly, noting how some cubicles had been customized with small comforts, family photos, mini fans, desk lamps with warm yellow bulbs. Others were blank, as if the people inside hadn't decided whether they were allowed to leave an imprint. Near the back, a young woman sat with her headphones around her neck and a scarf draped loosely over her shoulders. She looked up when I passed, her brows lifting in polite confusion. "Can I help you?" she asked. I stopped. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with someone in support. You seem like you know your way around." She smiled faintly. "I'm Tanya. I'm usually the first one in." "Good habit." She stood, extending a hand. "And you are?" "Elena." Her handshake was firm, still cautious, but open. I sat on the edge of her cubicle's visitor chair. "Mind if I ask what kind of calls you take?" Tanya blinked. "All kinds. Mostly escalations, the ones that make it past 3 different layers and still haven't been fixed. Do you get to follow up on those?" She laughed softly. "No, we're supposed to pass them along, document and hand off. Not our job to resolve, just to move them to the next queue." "And how often does that work?" Tanya gave a wry tilt of her head. "Sometimes. Mostly. They fall into the cracks. Some of those tickets never close. They just cycle." I nodded slowly. "That must be frustrating." "It is," she said, "but you get used to it. You tell yourself you're not paid to care too much." That line stayed with me. Not paid to care too much. I stood and thanked her, asked her name again, and promised to return. I could feel her eyes on my back as I walked away, curious now, trying to place the older woman who didn't carry a clipboard or wear a badge around her neck. When I returned to my office, the assistant had already prepped my schedule: meetings, performance reviews, a lunch briefing with the legal team. But I asked her to clear the morning. I spent it writing. Not a memo, not a strategy outline. A letter. It started with, "To the people who carry the weight this company never sees," and it ended with a promise, an internal restructuring of how labor was valued, how solutions were measured, and who got to speak in rooms that were once closed to them. I copied the letter into a file and sent it directly to the heads of every department, marked non-optional reading. Then I printed one, folded it carefully, and walked it back down to the 5th floor. When I handed it to Tanya, she looked surprised. "I wrote something," I said. "For you, for everyone here. It'll reach the others by email. But I wanted you to see it first." She unfolded the paper, eyes scanning. Her expression didn't change at first, but I watched something shift in the tilt of her posture. Her grip softened. She looked up. "You're the CEO?" I nodded. She swallowed. "Why? Why start here?" "Because this is where the foundation is. And no one builds from the roof down." We stood in silence. Then she offered the letter back to me. "Keep it," I said. "I want your voice in the next meeting we hold." Tanya blinked twice. "Wait, you want me to join the feedback session, speak for your floor, and bring whoever else has something to say?" I left her standing there with the letter in her hand and a look on her face I hadn't seen in a long time, a look I recognized, the look of being seen, not just counted. Back in my office, I closed the door and allowed myself a moment. Not to rest, but to breathe. This, I realized, was the real work. Not just buying a company or rewriting a speech. It was peeling back layers until you found the people holding everything up and telling them they could stop whispering. 3 days later, I walked into the boardroom with the firm intention of staying quiet for the first 10 minutes at least. The room was colder than necessary, as if the thermostat had been set a few notches too low to keep people alert. The chairs were the kind that looked ergonomic until you sat in them long enough to question the design. Long mahogany table, 12 leather seats, 10 David Richardson, the former CEO turned advisor, was already seated, legs crossed, sipping espresso from a narrow white cup. He glanced up as I entered and gave me that trademark half smile that always seemed to say, "Don't mistake my politeness for approval." "Ms. Rodriguez," he greeted, standing only partially. "I trust the town hall went well?" "It did," I said, taking my place at the head of the table. "Though it wasn't for show." "I assumed not," he replied, voice even. The others murmured greetings. Some were polite, some wary, most unreadable. I recognized the stance, people bracing for change. They didn't initiate. Once the formalities passed, the CFO, a sharp woman named Deidre, whose blazer sleeves were always perfectly tailored, got us started. "Let's begin with quarterly forecasts," she said, launching into a report peppered with revenue graphs and cost trajectories. I listened. I let her speak without interruption, watching the numbers rise and dip in waves across the projected slides. When she finished, The room filled with the usual shuffle of pens and murmured, Thank you, Deidre, I said. Well done. She looked momentarily surprised. I didn't mind. Let them underestimate. I waited a beat, then stood, sliding a slim folder onto the center of the table. I'd like to introduce a supplemental initiative, I said. Eyes lifted. This, I continued, is Project Second Floor, a cross-departmental pilot involving customer support, logistics integration, and real-time problem resolution. We'll be identifying 5 pain points in the escalation process and solving them within 2 weeks, using staff from all levels, especially the ones usually left out of strategy meetings. A silence followed that was neither hostile nor approving, just curious. Richardson spoke first. And how will this affect deliverables for Q3? It won't, I said. Because deliverables without infrastructure are decoration. We've been spinning our wheels on external growth while the internal process leaks talent, motivation, and continuity. One of the junior board members, a man whose name escaped me but whose haircut was clearly new, asked, Is this meant to be a morale program? No, I replied. This is structural. Morale is a symptom. We're going after the disease. Deidre folded her hands. And you believe involving lower-level staff directly will improve efficiency? I believe it's the only way to uncover the real inefficiencies because the ones closest to the problem know more than anyone trying to solve it from a spreadsheet. That landed harder than I expected. Richardson leaned back, expression unreadable. I'll admit, it's unconventional. So was the food truck I started in a neighborhood that had more debt collectors than customers, I said calmly. But I learned to pivot, and that's what this company needs. A pivot inward before it tries to leap outward again. They didn't vote. They didn't need to. I wasn't asking permission. I was informing them. By the time the meeting ended, a few heads nodded, a few exchanged glances, and Richardson, after everyone else filed out, remained in his seat, arms crossed lightly. You've rattled the frame, he said, almost amused. Good, I replied, collecting my notes. Frames are meant to hold truth, not paint over it. He stood slowly. You're not here to play by the old rules, are you? I didn't come to play, I said. I came to build. He nodded once, eyes assessing. Well, if you ever need a devil's advocate, I'm still on retainer. Thank you, David, I said. But I think I've had enough of devils for one lifetime. I left the room before he could laugh. Later that afternoon, I sat in my office, staring at the folded draft of Project Second Floor. My assistant had already scanned copies for the implementation team. Tanya would be part of the pilot. Marcus had volunteered to lead one of the cross-department briefings. Progress moves slowly at first, like syrup in winter. But I felt it in the building now, in the way the elevator rides weren't so stiff, in the eye contact from employees who used to look past me, in the murmured, she remembered my name, I overheard in the hallway just this morning. And in myself. It's a strange thing, to sit in power and still feel grounded. To hold a company in your name and still remember the cracked linoleum of your old kitchen floor. But that was the only way I knew how to lead. Not above, not below. Alongside, my phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Tanya crushed the training call. You were right. She sees the whole picture. Also, can I bring dessert on Sunday? I stared at the screen for a moment, letting it warm me. Bring 2, I replied. The team might stay after dinner. Then I looked out at the office again and whispered something no one else would hear. Let them underestimate. That's where all the power is. The company cafe wasn't meant to host major announcements. It had white tile floors, tabletops smudged with fingerprints, and an awkward echo when too many voices collided. But it had something more important than design. It had familiarity. It was where the new interns nursed burnt coffee during onboarding, where engineers met after late nights to compare bug reports, where Tanya now greeted coworkers by name. So when Marcus suggested we hold the Project Second Floor rollout meeting there, I didn't hesitate. This space, he said, feels like it belongs to everyone. He was right. The following Thursday, just after 4:30, we moved 24 chairs from the conference rooms and rolled in a large screen borrowed from facilities. We propped it up by the pastry case where the muffins had already gone stale, and no one seemed to mind. I stood just off to the side, letting Marcus introduce the initiative to the staff. He didn't read from notes. He didn't wear a suit. He looked around the room like a man trying to make sure everyone had a place to sit, even if they didn't yet know they were welcome. "We're not just piloting a program," he said, voice steady. "We're shifting the way we solve problems. Not from the top down, not in silos, but together." He gestured toward the panel of employees seated beside him: Tanya, 2 engineers, a logistics coordinator from the warehouse team, and a junior designer who had once fixed a coding glitch no one else could replicate. "These are our leads," he said. "Their insights are not backup, they are central." The crowd applauded, not with the polite clapping of required participation, but the kind that grows with energy. When Marcus turned the floor over to me, I didn't take the mic. Instead, I stepped forward and let my voice carry naturally. "I started a food truck once," I said. "It broke down in a Walgreens parking lot during our first week. We had no customers, no working generator, just me, a teenage son who'd never chopped an onion in his life, and one good skillet." Laughter rippled through the room. That night, we made 10 sandwiches and gave 5 of them away. Not because we were being generous, but because we needed people to believe we were worth returning to. We needed community. I paused. And we learned something. Not about food, about service. That people trust consistency more than they trust charisma. That the person refilling the napkin dispensers matters just as much as the one running the register. That problems rarely belong to a single department, because customers don't experience departments. They experience the company. Tanya was watching me. So were her colleagues from the 5th floor. So were the executives standing near the back, one of whom I had seen earlier that day reviewing termination projections from a previous regime. He didn't hold those papers now. "This initiative is not about being nice," I continued. "It's about being smart enough to listen. The old way says you earn your seat by staying quiet until you're invited. The new way, the right way, says we build the table differently so no one waits to be called." I closed with that. No slogan, no buzzwords, just the truth, offered plainly. Afterward, as people gathered in groups to talk, Marcus and I found ourselves alone by the coffee station. He poured me a cup and added sugar without asking. "You remembered," I said, taking it. "Of course." We sat at the corner table, watching the room pulse with connection. Conversations bloomed in all corners, across roles, titles, tenures. Tanya stood with 2 product managers, animatedly explaining the internal tracking system she'd created. A logistics rep and an accountant were drawing something on a napkin with an expo marker. Marcus leaned toward me, voice quiet. "I used to think leadership was about keeping control," he said. "Keeping your name attached to everything, your hands in every decision. And now?" I asked. "Now I think it's about releasing control, about holding space instead of holding reins." He looked at me then, really looked. The pride in his eyes wasn't showy. It was quiet, rooted, like a tree, realizing the strength of its own branches only after surviving a storm. "I was wrong about you," he said. "And I'm sorry it took a boardroom and a company reorg to learn who you really are." "No," I replied, placing my hand gently over his. "You weren't wrong about me. You just forgot who you came from." We stayed like that for a while, 2 generations, at the edge of a room remade by inclusion, not authority. It wasn't everything. Not yet. But it was a beginning. And beginnings, if done right, never really end. The invitation to speak at the citywide Women in Leadership Summit came in a cream envelope with a gold foil seal, hand-delivered. That sort of gesture used to mean something. Still does, to people like me. It was folded with care, the edges sharp, the language respectful, but expectant. "As someone who has redefined what leadership can look like, your presence would honor our closing night." I sat with the letter in my lap for a while before replying. I wasn't used to being asked for final words. Most of my life had been spent handing out instructions while others walked away with the microphone. But this wasn't a panel or a polished speech for shareholders. It wasn't about profits or processes. It was about legacy. I thought of the women who used to stand behind me in line at the wholesale market. The ones who carried toddlers on one hip and invoices in the other hand. I thought of Miss Hensley from apartment 4B, who taught me how to file my first tax return using a flashlight and a worn IRS booklet, because the power had gone out. I thought of Tanya, of Mia, of every young woman who had ever stood at the edge of a room, wondering if she belonged inside. And I wrote. Not from memory, but from something deeper than that, from experience scraped off the bones of years no one ever wrote about, from moments that didn't make the news, but made a life. On the night of the event, I dressed slowly. The pearl necklace sat light against my collarbone. My wrap dress, this time in deep navy, embroidered with pale gold, fit perfectly. The air was crisp, but not cold, the kind of evening that made you feel alert in your own skin. Marcus picked me up in a modest black car he insisted on renting, just for the occasion. You don't have to escort me, I told him. I know, he said gently, but I want to. When we arrived at the downtown hall, the buzz inside the lobby was thick with polite chatter, the kind that signals a crowd not sure whether to expect a keynote or a confession. The stage was minimal, a podium, 2 potted plants, and a large LED screen that projected my name in serif letters. I took the stage after the applause faded. I didn't bring notes. I brought truth. When I was 19, I worked a closing shift at a diner that served more coffee than food and more silence than praise. I used to tuck the day's tips in a tin under the seat of my car, praying they'd stretch through the weekend. Most nights, I smelled like fryer grease and burned onions. I remember thinking, this can't be the start of anything real. I let that sit for a moment. But it was, because leadership doesn't start with a corner office. It starts with showing up when no one's watching. It starts with failing and getting back up with your sleeves already rolled. I glanced at the audience, faces of all ages, some with pens poised, others just listening, hands still. Don't let anyone convince you that silence means absence or that humility means you haven't earned your place. There's a kind of strength in those of us who wait, who watch, who study the floor before we speak. We are the ones who change the room, not by shouting, but by lasting. I moved from behind the podium then, walking to the edge of the stage. There's power in being underestimated. I built a business out of nothing but timing and tenderness. I raised a son in a 1-bedroom apartment and taught him how to make dinner from canned beans and laughter. I stood in rooms where my voice shook, but my spine didn't. Laughter. Soft. Knowing. I didn't always believe I'd end up here. I never needed to. I only needed to keep going. I paused, letting the silence breathe. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build into others while you're still here. A murmur of understanding moved through the room, the kind that doesn't need applause to mean yes. I smiled, not broadly, but deeply. Then I said one last thing. Leadership isn't about being the first to speak. Sometimes it's about being the last to leave, and making sure no one's forgotten when the lights come back on. And with that, I walked off stage. No music, no fanfare, just quiet thunder. Afterward, in the hallway just outside the auditorium, a young woman stopped me. She couldn't have been more than 22. Her blazer sleeves were too long, her voice careful. You made me feel like I didn't have to become someone else to lead. I placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't. You just have to remember who you are when they try to tell you otherwise. She nodded, biting her lip, like someone holding back the emotion she wasn't ready to name. I turned, finding Marcus waiting by the door. His phone was in his pocket. His eyes were on me. You didn't mention the company once, he said, as we walked out to the car. It wasn't about the company tonight, I replied. It was about the ones who keep showing up anyway. The city was quiet again, but not asleep, and neither was I. It wasn't called a party, no formal invitations, no caterers, no keynote, just a company-wide end-of-quarter reflection gathering scheduled for a Friday evening after hours with an optional potluck and music playlist submitted by staff. But when I stepped into the main atrium that evening, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like home. Paper lanterns hung from the steel beams, casting soft amber light across the room. The usual gray modular chairs had been pushed aside and replaced with mismatched seating, beanbags, borrowed stools, folding chairs from supply. Tables held trays of food, labeled in different handwritings. There was rice and beans, lumpia, mac and cheese, bagels, plantains, veggie kebabs, and one tray of something unidentifiable that had disappeared before I had a chance to ask. I stood at the top of the second-floor landing, looking down at the crowd below. No suits, no lanyards, just people. People laughing, talking across departments, sleeves rolled, shoes kicked off, music low but steady. Tanya was there, surrounded by a mix of support staff and junior managers passing around a tub of lemonade like it was contraband. One of the warehouse shift leads danced with a marketing assistant while the operations director clapped off beat nearby. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. I wanted to feel every step. When I reached the bottom, someone handed me a paper plate. Someone else offered me a homemade empanada. I accepted both. Not out of obligation, but gratitude. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but lingers in the chest, like a warm ache. Marcus appeared from the corner, already smiling. "You're late," he said. "I'm precisely on time," I replied, taking a small bite and savoring the flavor. "Who made these?" He gestured toward a woman near the drink table. "Mania, finance team. She makes a batch every Friday. No one knew until last week. And now, she's already taking pre-orders." I shook my head, smiling. "You don't learn this in executive training." "No," he agreed. "You live it." We stood side by side for a while, watching the room, not from above but within. "Do you remember," he said, "when I told you I didn't invite you to my promotion party?" I looked at him. "Yes. I didn't know who I was back then," he said, voice quieter now. "Not really. I thought I had to be sharper, smoother, less rooted." He turned slightly, gesturing at the people in front of us, tech leads eating fried chicken off paper towels, executives barefoot on a shared rug someone had dragged in from the design studio. "And now I realize," he said, "I don't have to hide where I came from, because where I came from still shows up every day, with sleeves rolled and hands steady." He looked at me then, not as a son afraid of being seen, but as a man fully awake to the woman who raised him. "I'm proud of you," he said. I took his hand. "I'm proud of us." A gentle hush moved through the room as someone tapped a spoon against a mason jar. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't planned, but slowly, voices lowered and heads turned. A circle formed around me before I even realized what was happening. Someone cleared a spot at the center. Marcus looked at me, uncertain. "Say something," he whispered. "I wasn't going to," I said. "You should," he replied. "Not because you need to, because they're listening." So I stepped forward. Not to a podium, just to the center of the crowd. And I spoke. "This wasn't supposed to happen," I began. "Not like this." Laughter rippled lightly. "I mean that in the best way. What we've built here wasn't outlined in a business plan. It wasn't budgeted or bullet-pointed. It grew in the quiet, in the cracks of the system, in the moments when someone stayed late to help a teammate or spoke up in a room they weren't invited into." People nodded. Tanya was near the back, arms crossed, smiling gently. "This place, what it's becoming, was made by people who decided to care even when they weren't paid to, who listened when silence was easier, who worked through fear, not because they lacked it, but because they carried hope harder." I paused, eyes sweeping across the faces. Real leadership doesn't start at the top. It starts right here, in rooms like this, at tables like these, with people who remember each other's names, not just their roles. More than one person blinked hard, eyes wet. We've still got miles to go, systems to rewire, voices to raise. But tonight, we can say this much. We've started something. I lifted my cup. To the quiet builders, the unseen glue, the ones who stayed when it would have been easier to walk. Glasses lifted, cups raised. To legacy, someone echoed. To belonging, someone else added. And with that, the room was alive again. Not with noise, but with something older than celebration. With recognition. Later that night, long after most had gone home, I sat alone in the corner of the room with a plate of cooling pasta and a slice of lemon cake someone had wrapped for me in foil. The lantern still glowed, the stereo played low. My heels were off, tucked beside my chair. Marcus came back, holding his phone. "I got one picture," he said, turning the screen toward me. It was blurry, but true, me in the center of a circle, hands slightly raised, laughter forming on my lips. "You look like you belong there," he said. I looked at the photo. "I do." And for the first time in years, I didn't doubt it. 3 months passed. The office no longer felt like a machine. It breathed differently now, like a body healed enough to move without flinching. You could hear laughter in the stairwells, The break room plants weren't plastic anymore. Conference doors stayed open during meetings. Tanya now ran the Friday mentorship roundtables with a presence that left even the more seasoned leads nodding along. The quarterly numbers looked good, but more than that, people stayed. People who once used the word tolerable to describe their jobs now lingered after hours to help interns rehearse presentations or solve problems that weren't theirs. And Marcus, he had started something of his own. A small leadership cohort for first-generation professionals, open to employees from every department. He called it Rooted Rising. I didn't tell him how much that name moved me. One quiet Thursday morning, I sat at my desk before the office filled and pulled out the small linen box I'd kept in the drawer since my first day in this building. I hadn't opened it in months. Inside, everything looked untouched, though it never truly was. There was the folded photo of Marcus and me standing in front of the food truck, grease on our aprons and wind in our hair. A handwritten thank you note from Rosa that still smelled faintly of cinnamon. A crumpled scrap of paper with Wallace's scrawl, "Make them listen before they speak." At the very bottom, tucked into the crease, was the flyer from Marcus's promotion party, the one he never gave me. I had nearly thrown it away that first week. But something in me knew it wasn't just a reminder. It was a marker, not of failure, but of change. I turned it over now, running my fingers along the back. I could hear his voice in my mind, trying to explain, trying to soften what had already been said. You don't fit in with these people. How strange now, to realize how right he had been, just not in the way he meant. I didn't fit in. I'd reshaped the room instead. There was a knock at the door. Marcus entered without waiting for a reply, carrying 2 coffees and a box with gold ribbon. He looked too casual for an executive, rolled sleeves, a faint coffee stain near his collar, but somehow more confident than I'd ever seen him in a suit. "Last day," he said. I nodded, accepting the coffee. "Almost." He placed the box on my desk. "It's from the staff. You're not allowed to open it until the party." I never agreed to a party. He grinned. "That's why we planned one anyway." I sighed with mock disapproval. "You've become bold." I had a good teacher. I looked at him for a long moment. He no longer carried the weight of pretense. He stood like a man who remembered his roots and respected them. "Are you ready?" I asked. He sat across from me. "To take over or to do it differently?" "Both." He leaned forward. "I'm scared, if I'm honest. But I'm also certain. I don't need to be you to lead like you. I just need to stay honest." "That's all any of us can do," I said. "That and keep learning how to listen." A long silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, not uncertain, just full. Eventually, he stood. "I'll come get you at 5. Wear something celebratory." I thought I already was. He laughed. "You always do." After he left, I walked to the window and looked down at the city one last time, as its morning traffic wove through the streets like threads in a tapestry. I didn't feel like I was leaving. I felt like I'd made enough space for others to arrive. My name would remain on the board, but I'd step back from daily operations. It was time. The company didn't need me to hold it up anymore. It had found its spine. I had done what I came here to do, and that was more than enough. That evening, the atrium glowed brighter than I had ever seen it. No lanterns this time. Just natural light fading into a warm dusk, reflecting off glass and steel that no longer felt sterile. The tables were lined with handwritten notes from employees. Not gifts, just words, thank yous, memories, the kind of messages people usually leave too late. Tanya stood with a microphone near the garden wall, Marcus beside her, a folder in his hands. I watched from the far side of the room, letting the music and hum of voices wrap around me like a soft shawl. Someone offered me a drink. Someone else pulled out a chair. Then Marcus called my name. "Elena Rodriguez," he said, "didn't just buy a company. She didn't just rescue it. She reimagined it. She taught us that the past doesn't have to be hidden to build a future. That sometimes leadership looks like showing up early, staying late, and never asking for applause." I stood then, walked slowly to the center of the space. People cleared a path, not out of obligation, but reverence. When I reached Marcus, he stepped back. I took the mic, not because I needed to say more, but because silence would have left too much unsaid. "I came here feeling unwelcome in a place my own son worked," I said, and now I leave knowing my legacy doesn't end with me, it multiplies through every one of you. I looked at Marcus, then Tanya, then the crowd. Don't wait to be invited. Build the room, light it, fill it, and when you leave it, make sure the next person sees a chair with their name on it. The applause came like thunder wrapped in warmth. And I knew I hadn't been invited to that first party. But I'd made this one possible,